Happy Friday, everybody. James Hancock here. I'm back to review the new movie Prey, which dropped today on Hulu. Prey is the latest movie in the Predator franchise, a franchise that I was very familiar with as a child and very familiar with as an adult. I saw Predator in the theater probably 700,000 times since then, and I really love the Danny Glover sequel as well. So I don't say this lightly. I think Prey is a very worthy addition to the Predator franchise. They basically take the Predator and set him in a totally new environment, 1719 in the northern Great Plains, where he's surrounded by wolves and snakes and big cats and bears and French buffalo hunters, but more importantly, the great Comanche Nation. And for people who don't know, the Comanches were some of the baddest motherfuckers who ever lived. For many, many years, they kept many empires at bay, and they kept their fellow tribes absolutely terrified. I strongly recommend Empire of the Summer Moon, an absolutely brilliant book about what is known about Comanche history. They weren't necessarily big on writing books, so they were big into the oral tradition, so sadly, a lot of the history is lost, but we do know their history from the point of view of the people that they were fighting, and they basically were the greatest light cavalry in the world at that time. When one person might be struggling to reload a rifle in combat, they could plug you with 10 arrows while hiding behind their horse, and they were gone before you even really knew what hit you. So they're the perfect warriors to go head-to-head with the Predator in this movie, and I think Amber Midthunder did a brilliant job as Naru. It helps quite a bit in any action movie when your hero looks like a bad motherfucker, and she just looks so cool with her war paint under her eyes, or I guess it's like, it always helps when somebody's throwing their tomahawks or using the bow and arrow, that they just look totally lethal in action. And the only thing I'd seen her in beforehand was the show Legion, and she was cool in Legion, but I think she has leveled up in this movie and has proven that she can totally be the star of her own flick. And she's got some assistance from actor Dakota Beavers, who plays her brother, and he's cool as hell in this as well. He can walk the walk and talk the talk, and he looks great on horseback, and he's great with the tomahawk and bow and arrow as well. But I'm just relieved that the movie is a pretty cool movie-going experience, because I'm so accustomed to franchises that I love from decades ago being completely, totally wrecked and destroyed by modern interpretations or remakes and sequels. My default position is leave everything alone that was ever cool in the past and try to invent new stuff. Find new books that have not been adapted, or write original screenplays and invent characters that are just as cool as the movies like Predator from the past that have inspired you to become a filmmaker. But as far as keeping an old school legacy franchise alive goes, I think Prey is one of the better efforts I've seen. And so I should praise the screenplay by Patrick Ason and Dan Trachtenberg, and obviously it's loosely based on characters by Jim Thomas. And it's also directed by Dan Trachtenberg, who previously did 10 Cloverfield Lane. And I've got a troubled history with that movie, because when it first came out, I had just started dabbling with doing like podcasting and online reviews and that sort of thing. And I had the audacity to criticize the last act of that movie, which I thought was totally absurd. And I got my first online death threat where somebody was threatening to come to New York and wait outside my apartment and fight me. He was like some wrestler or whatever. At any rate, I feel like you haven't, arrived as an online commentator until you get your first death threat. So I popped my cherry with 10 Cloverfield Lane, but Dan Trachtenberg has also done things like an episode of Black Mirror and an episode of The Boys. But I think this is his best thing I've seen yet. I think this movie totally destroys 10 Cloverfield Lane. It's vastly superior, which makes me wonder why this movie was not pushed first as a theatrical exclusive. Now, I know everybody loves lying around on their couches in their underwear, ripping bong hits and watching movies. But there's something very disposable about a movie that does not have a theatrical run. There's something about a theatrical run, even when the theatrical experience can be so horrible at most theaters in terms of the way your fellow patrons behave or just the overall experience. But if you can find a good theater like an Alamo Drafthouse, the experience can be a really positive one. I feel like Prey would have a more lasting impression on the culture. It would leave a larger footprint or a larger ripple effect if it had at least like 6 weeks in the theater, because I feel like most shows and movies that just kind of get uploaded on Friday on these big streaming platforms, people kind of watch them, they shit them out, and they just wash down the stream. So I hope Prey will linger in people's minds a little longer in spite of being immediately available on Hulu. So let's talk about pros and cons, or the good and the bad. Like, what does this movie have to offer that makes it worth hunting down? And I think first and foremost, it delivered on the action. Like, there's certain shots of the Predator, like when he's fighting a bear and holding it up over its head, his blood is dripping down its camouflage body, where I was like, God damn, that looks pretty damn cool. It did not shrink away from blood and dismemberment and that sort of thing. If you're going to do a Predator movie, you got to go all in, because he's a trophy hunter. He likes to collect skulls. And the first movie we saw him, like, ripping people's spinal cords out and that sort of thing. It wouldn't surprise me if somebody over at Disney's like, hey, well, can we do it as a PG-13 and bring in a larger audience? But luckily they stuck with the R rating, and they earned the R rating many times over. But the flip side of the action is that I would argue that sometimes the action feels more like a superhero movie as opposed to like a grounded action movie, because as over the top and insane and like kind of roided up as the first movie was, the battle scenes in terms of the guns, like the guys definitely felt mortal. They were total badasses, but they were not capable of doing like super heroic deeds. And from the word go in this movie, Naru's doing certain things, like the way she runs around and slides on the ground, the way she's chasing down animals in the forest and using her dog as a teammate. It's just a little bit above and beyond what you would expect from a human being, but not in excess. Like, nothing that you have to be too concerned about, but just like she has a tomahawk attached to a rope, which she's constantly throwing and then pulling back. It doesn't completely pass the smell test in terms of making the action feel grounded. But once again, it's not a stoning offense. It's nothing to get too worked up about, because on the whole, I felt like the action was pretty damn good, especially anytime you see the Predator taking damage, because this movie is not afraid to show the Predator taking some hits from everything that he encounters. When he fights a wolf, the wolf makes him bleed. When he fights a grizzly bear, the grizzly bear bites the shit out of him, makes him bleed. When he fights buffalo hunters, they shoot him repeatedly. They make him bleed. He definitely is slowly but surely getting chipped away at. And, the Comanches, they're taking giant lances and just completely impaling him and skewering him. That's even the word. He gets skewered by their lances. And so on the whole, I found the action to be very visceral, very intense, very exciting. And while this movie is not necessarily dialogue heavy, what I liked is how it has an interesting kind of philosophical debate at its core about why do we hunt, why do we kill, like what is driving you? Is it hunger? Is it trophy hunting? Is it an eagerness to prove yourself? Is it in self-defense? Is it for survival? And there are a bunch of different characters in this movie, all of whom are killing for different reasons. Like the buffalo hunters, they are killing for profit. Naru's older brother is killing to feed the tribe. And you have the Predator, who obviously is hunting for sport. He's hunting for trophies. And with Naru, you can tell she wants to be a hunter. She doesn't want to stay back and clean skins and that sort of thing back at the camp. She wants to be out in the field hunting animals. She really wants to prove herself. But in the end, it's all about survival and self-defense and killing this threat that is slowly but surely systematically eliminating her entire tribe. And some of those fight scenes early on where he's taking out the Comanches are totally badass, because they're not really like afraid of them, but they definitely recognize they're up against a vastly superior opponent. But what this movie lacks that the first Predator and the second Predator had is a great ensemble cast. I mean, the first Predator movie has one of the greatest ensemble casts in movie history, where just the closing credits, where you're getting to see all the actors who were in the film, it's like the greatest contribution to human civilization like of the last 100 years. I could just watch that on a loop. That cast was so goddamn good, and they're all just such dynamic characters with so much flavor and personality. Prey does not have that to offer, nor does it have all the incredible lines and all the dirty jokes. I mean, the screenplay for the first Predator movie is a real thing of beauty. So, but it's not really a criticism, because Prey's not going for that. Prey is much more of a standalone story where we're seeing most of the movie from the point of view of the protagonist. So you can't really knock it for something that it's not trying to be. This movie definitely is trying to be its own thing and knows exactly what kind of movie that it wants to be. And so while it doesn't have all these great quotable lines from the first movie, it does have a few nods to the past, like the great line, one of the lines that I love most from the first movie, "If it bleeds, we can kill it." So when I heard that in this movie, I was like, all right, they at least are tipping their hat to what came before while at the same time trying to do their own thing. And I guess if you wanted to criticize this movie for some overused tropes, they perhaps overplay their hand when it comes to all the fellow Comanches constantly telling the central character that because she's a girl, she's not allowed to go hunting with them. But it doesn't really hurt the movie that much, even if perhaps there's 3 or 4 too many scenes along those lines. But where the movie really redeems itself is the relationship between Naru and Tabe, or Tabi, if that's how you pronounce his name. Their relationship is incredibly heartwarming, and they're a great team, and it's interesting watching them together in action. And yeah, Dakota Beavers, I'd never seen him in anything prior to this, but I really enjoyed watching him on the screen. He's a cool performer, and I hope to see more of him. And Amber Midthunder, obviously, we're going to be seeing lots more of her in the future. She looks fantastic. She's got the chops. She can move well. She can do the action. Yeah, she absolutely delivered everything that was asked of her. So in terms of new flavors or details that this movie has to offer, the Predator has a different arsenal in this. You can tell it's a slightly more primitive version of the Predator, and so he doesn't have like a fucking cannon that can just take people out from a distance. Instead, it shoots arrows, which are pretty cool. But he has this one razor net, which we'd seen a previous version of the razor net, but the razor net in this is particularly gruesome. And I love the shield that it uses in combat for blocking bullets. It feels a little bit more medieval. So I enjoyed all those badass battles. The one weapon or tool in this movie that I did not like is this medicine that the central character uses again and again. And it's basically kind of her secret weapon for survival, because it's a medicine that they use in the tribe that anytime like they find somebody who's been mauled by a cat and they use it to try to keep them alive. But what happens is it brings your body temperature down as a side effect while it's healing you. But of course, the Predator hunts people based upon their heat. And so suddenly she realizes that this is like a secret weapon for not being seen by the Predator. And it feels a little bit too much like a superpower or something that was kind of inserted into the movie. But in the end, it doesn't make or break the movie. But if people feel as if she's a little overpowered because of this little powder that she has, I totally get that criticism. And along those lines, the way that she kills the Predator at the end, I was kind of calling bullshit, not because I felt like it was impossible for her to kill the Predator, because we see the Predator getting just completely hacked to pieces throughout the course of the movie. Once again, if it bleeds, we can kill it. But the manner in which the Predator is killed is so sophisticated and complex, it just feels a little bit like movie bullshit as opposed to something that's earned. And maybe they should have considered coming up with a kill that's a little less fancy. I mean, in the first Predator, he just blows himself up. It's very simple. I mean, he's lying there on the ground, and Arnold's like, "What the hell are you?" Or "Who the hell are you?" I can't even remember. But anyway, it's a great scene. But the Predator's lying there, coughing up green glowing blood, and then does a little self-destruct. And it's a great kill. So this movie doesn't quite have the same satisfying kill, but what it does have is plenty of balls to the wall, just ruthless action. I wouldn't have minded a better score. The score to the first Predator is something really special, and it's just one of the most pulse-pounding action scores ever. But once again, we're comparing a movie to a movie that I regard to be like a sci-fi action horror classic, a masterpiece. As I go back and revisit films from the 80s, whether you're talking about Lethal Weapon or Die Hard or Terminator or whatever the case might be, the Predator is always climbing higher to the point where I'm like, is the Predator like the best goddamn action movie ever made? Like, I feel like there's a case to be made. And Kevin Peter Hall played a large role in that. Kevin Peter Hall, who played Predator, he moved so well. I think he had a history as a ballet dancer prior to playing the monster. And there was just a grace and a danger. The way he moved when he would spread his arms and would pick up Arnold and was like smacking the shit out of him left and right. They really they struck true casting gold with one of the greatest physical performers imaginable to bring that creature to life. And I still think the Predator from the first Predator is the most expressive of all of them. Something about his eyes and his mandibles, there's so much personality in his face that it just communicated volumes and made it hysterical. And Arnold says, like, "You are one ugly motherfucker," yada, yada, yada. The face on the Predator in this it's almost kind of hard to see in a lot of ways, but you're not going to recreate like a classic monster every time out of the gate. I would say the original Predator is up there with any classic monster from any era you care to mention, whether you're talking about Hammer horror films from the 50s and 60s or Universal horror films from the 30s. Predator it's one of the great movie monsters. And that's why people keep coming back and doing sequels and remakes and spin-offs, etc. And I have a feeling 100 years from now, people will still be trying to find ways to keep the Predator relevant, and I doubt the first movie will ever get outperformed or outshone, but Prey is worth a look. I turned it on like 1 a.m. last night, and I was like, I'll watch it until I feel like falling asleep. I was up the entire movie, and I was like, God damn. I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to bed late tonight, but I had a lot of fun. I'm not going to oversell it. I'm not going to claim it's some great movie masterpiece. But if you saw the trailer and it looked intriguing and you like Predator, definitely give it a shot. And if you haven't watched the first 2 Predator movies in a long time, go back and rewatch those as well. Danny Glover and his ensemble cast in the sequel, and L.A., like crime-ridden L.A. when it's hot as hell, that was a great environment for a Predator movie, and I think it has a lot of really interesting scenes. And if you're interested in the Comanches, like I said, Empire of the Summer Moon, it is some of the most gripping, riveting history that you could ever possibly hope to read, and you will come away from it with a completely new perspective on the Comanches. I mean, they're not teddy bears. They do a lot of ruthless things. I mean, a lot of their enemies learned the hard way what their cock and balls taste like after they were castrated and had their bits and pieces shoved into their mouths. It can be very ruthless at times, but also it can be incredibly thrilling. And some of the battle scenes in that book, I mean, they'll blow your hair back. So anyway, that book is my highest possible recommendation, as does the original Predator. But I think at this point I'm officially rambling. Like I said, I didn't sleep much last night, and so my mind is kind of going in all these different directions at once. I'm ready to start my weekend. So I'm going to wrap this up. Please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the video, all those wonderful, beautiful things. And if you want to talk about Predator movies or Prey or whatever, hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out. But I hope everyone has an amazing weekend, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.